Dear YouTube, as you know, under copyright law, I am allowed to use portions of copyrighted material, in this case, copyrighted material belonging to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, so long as this is used for the purpose of criticism and parody. Please remember this when Watchtower comes complaining, because I've embarrassed them by using their propaganda in a way they disapprove of. Thank you. Hello there, and welcome to my rebuttal of the June 2017 JW Broadcasting episode, which is hosted by governing body helper Robert Luccioni. Now, there's an awful lot I can talk about in this month's episode, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Welcome to another edition of JW Broadcasting. Have you ever felt discouraged due to circumstances beyond your control?
Actually, yes. I'm more than a bit discouraged about the fact that I continue to be shunned as a 37-year-old man because of a decision I was coerced into making as an 11-year-old.
There are many exciting things happening in Jehovah's organization. Why, month after month, we read articles, watch videos, and hear personal experiences about our brothers and sisters who are doing more for Jehovah. They are serving where the need is greater, or reaching out for the school for kingdom evangelizers. They are working on construction, renovation, maintenance of kingdom halls, or other theocratic projects. No doubt many of you watching this program are excitedly looking forward to expanding your ministry in one of these areas. We encourage you to do so. You can be assured that you will receive much fulfillment and many blessings from Jehovah.
Expanding your ministry. What a clever use of words that is when you think about it. What they really mean is improving your ministry or making your ministry better. But when someone says that, if you walk up to someone and say, well, you know, you really need to improve your ministry, that doesn't come across too well. So better to use a more abstract word like expanding. If someone says, have you considered expanding your ministry? Then suddenly, you know, it changes. You're not improving it per se, you're just expanding it. You're building on what's already there. But of course, what expanding your ministry really means is optimizing the level of service that you give to Watchtower.
Let's start by looking at some who could have let their circumstances limit them. Consider first the example of Joseph in the book of Genesis. Now, Joseph faced injustice at its worst. His situation was especially hurtful since it was initially brought on by those who should have been closest to him, his family. As a second example, consider Hezekiah. Now, Hezekiah is one who might easily have felt that he was defined by his upbringing. Look at the terrible example that was set by his father Ahaz, as recorded in 2 Kings chapter 16. 2 Kings chapter 16, and notice what verse 3 says about Ahaz. Instead, he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and he even made his own son pass through the fire, following the detestable practices of the nations that Jehovah had driven out from before the Israelites. Hezekiah's father did detestable things in opposition to Jehovah.
Nobody would argue that burning your son or daughter alive is not a detestable thing, but I'm not sure the Bible is consistent in stressing this point. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses will be familiar with the story of Jephthah's daughter in Judges chapter 11. What they don't know is that the Watchtower's version of the story is entirely at odds with how it is conveyed in the Bible. take a look at the new children's book, Lessons You Can Learn from the Bible, where Jephthah is said to make the following promise to God in return for victory over his enemies. I will give you the first person who comes out of my house to meet me. Compare this with what Jephthah is recorded as saying in Judges 11 verse 30, according to the New World Translation. If you give the Ammonites into my hand, then whoever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites will become Jehovah's, and I will offer that one up as a burnt offering. Straight away, we can see why Watchtower has drastically simplified Jephthah's promise. A man pledging to offer someone in his house as a human sacrifice hardly makes for pleasant bedtime reading. But Watchtower goes even further than this in covering up the true horror of this story. According to the version in the children's book, here is what happens next. When Jephthah returned home, the first person to come out to meet him was his daughter, his only child. She was dancing and playing the tambourine. What would Jephthah do? He remembered his promise and said, "Oh no, my daughter, you have broken my heart. I made a promise to Jehovah. To keep it, I must send you to serve at the tabernacle in Shiloh." But his daughter said to him, "Father, if you made a promise to Jehovah, you must keep it. All I ask is that I can spend 2 months in the mountains with my female friends. Then I will go." Jephthah's daughter served faithfully at the tabernacle for the rest of her life. Every year, her friends went to Shiloh to visit her. We are therefore led to believe that rather than literally offering his daughter up as a sacrifice, Jephthah merely sent her off to the tabernacle to effectively become a nun. This narrative is seemingly supported by 2 verses in the account, namely Judges 11:35 and Judges 11:40. Verse 35 says, "When he saw her, he ripped his garments and said, 'Oh no, my daughter, you have broken my heart, for you have become the one I have banished. Now I have opened my mouth to Jehovah, and I am unable to turn back.'" And verse 40 says, "From year to year, the young women of Israel would go to give commendation to the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days in the year." These verses give the impression that Jephthah's daughter was merely banished into servitude and later enjoyed regular morale-boosting visits from her girlfriends. But you might be interested to learn that the New World Translation is unique in rendering the original text in this way. Let's compare the same account in other translations, starting with verse 35. The New International Version says, "When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, 'Oh no, my daughter, you have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break.'" No mention there of Jephthah's daughter being banished, and none either in any of the other versions. It seems the original vow, the one where his daughter gets burned alive, was what Jephthah had in mind. But what about verse 40? Here is how it is rendered in the New International Version. "That each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite." Instead of giving her commendation, the young women of Israel would go to commemorate her, which implies she wasn't there to receive them when they visited. Glance down at the other versions, and you will see that elsewhere the women are described as mourning or lamenting her. In other words, she had died. In summary, the Bible gives mixed messages when it comes to the rightness or wrongness of human sacrifice. The account of Jephthah, if read literally with no attempt at adding what isn't there, clearly describes a girl being ritualistically murdered as the result of an ill-conceived pact with God. And rather than accept the story, Watchtower tampers with the narrative, not just in its literature, but in the Bible itself, apparently to try to cover up the barbarity.
And there are many other examples as well. For example, are we in a difficult economic situation? Well, the account in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 tells us about the Macedonians. Paul says that they were in deep poverty, yet they begged to have a financial share in the relief work. Are we older in years? We may think of Anna. The account in Luke chapter 2, verses 36 through 38, tells us that she was 84 years old and that her husband had died after just 7 years of marriage. Yet she was never missing from the temple. She rendered sacred service day and night. What lessons do we learn from these accounts?
Jehovah's Witnesses have just been told that there are never any excuses for not doing what's expected of them when it comes to supporting Watchtower. If you're a Jehovah's Witness who is low on funds, you should be like the Macedonians who begged to give money despite being in deep poverty. And if you are an elderly Jehovah's Witness, you should never be missing from the meetings or ministry.
They did not let their circumstances or their past define them. They joyfully did what they could within the limits of their situation. And these are just a few examples. There are many others in the Bible.
I come from a land of love.
But John, there's still plenty you can do in the congregation. Why not
Sure,
focus on
that sounds good, but I'm no longer a ministerial servant. Why did I let my zeal for the ministry cool off? I know what the brothers must think of me now.
So just to give this some context, we're now being shown a dramatization featuring 3 fictitious Jehovah's Witnesses who are all discouraged for various reasons and all decide to draw on the Bible story of Jonah to get them out of their negative feelings. And we kick off with this ministerial servant who apparently is being told at the Kingdom Hall that he's no longer a ministerial servant. He's disqualified for some reason, apparently due to his zeal for the ministry cooling off, which again is very clever use of language, because Watchtower is referring, of course, to the well-worn prophecy that it often turns to of the love of the greater number cooling off in the last days. So this young man is apparently guilty of that. He's guilty of allowing his love for the ministry to cool off, and he needs to get his act together. But what's interesting is that he obviously looks very despondent. It's something he's not pleased about. But his thoughts turn to, what must everyone think of me? And isn't that interesting? That is, in fact, quite realistic in terms of what it's like to be a Jehovah's Witness. You're not just worried about what God thinks of you, about your relationship with the Creator, about your relationship with Jesus. The most pressing concern, especially if you're an appointed man, an elder or a ministerial servant, but the same applies to pioneers, you're very concerned about what other people in the congregation think of you. And that's just patently wrong. Why should religion be about appeasing others? You can see how this would get into a vicious circle where, it no longer matters per se what spiritual benefits you derive from a religion. Everyone in the religion is only in there to impress everyone else. Nobody stops and thinks, well, hang on, if I'm so preoccupied with what everyone else in the congregation is thinking about me, with what that brother thinks and with what that sister thinks, could it be that they're thinking the same thing about me? They're worried about how I perceive them, and we're all just caught up in this awful spiral of trying to appease each other.
Hello?
Oh, good morning. My name's Jane. How are you?
Not bad, thanks.
I know you may not be interested, but I have this tract I'd like to...
You may not be interested? Where did that come from? Not my best presentation, but it didn't seem like she wanted to talk more anyway.
This is one of 3 examples given in this dramatization of witnesses who need to learn from the Bible example of Jonah. In this case, the woman is shown giving what is considered to be a poor, half-hearted presentation on the doorstep. She later decides that if she improves her attitude by not considering the people she calls on as doomed, she stands a better chance of being more positive in her message. While it's certainly true that it's best not to think the worst of people we speak to, whether we're trying to convert them to our religion or not, I can't help but grimace at how a perfectly realistic doorstep presentation is portrayed as not meeting Watchtower's standards. The More Watchtower, through its videos, generates fictitious JW role models that nobody could possibly match up to, stale characters that are entirely unrelatable and who rarely put a foot wrong, the more the ordinary JW watching will feel alienated and disconnected, which I suppose can only be a good thing.
Try to think of someone in the Bible who may have felt like you do. Like Jonah.
Jonah felt like I do. What comes to your mind when you think of Jonah? Do you think of him as a disobedient prophet?
What comes to my mind when I think of Jonah is a Bible book brimming with outlandish, preposterous stories that can only be the product of some ancient writer's overactive imagination. An eccentric prophet gets swallowed by a big fish and lives in its gut for 72 hours without suffocating, only to be vomited out on a beach just so God can force him to do the mission he was running away from. Once on dry land, Jonah goes to Nineveh and is apparently so successful at persuading a non-Israelite nation to quit displeasing a God they were not covenanted to serve in the first place, that even the animals cover themselves in sackcloth as a show of repentance. Finally, once the whole Nineveh drama is over, God again torments Jonah by giving him a plant under which he can find shade, only to send a worm to destroy it, leaving him exposed to the wind and baking sun, whereupon Jonah proclaims that he wishes he was dead, because apparently being in the sun is even worse than spending 3 days in the anaerobic digestive tract of a sea creature. And all this, apparently, is a historical narrative from which people living in the 21st century can derive profound spiritual wisdom.
Reluctant to obey Jehovah's command, Jonah boarded a ship that carried him farther and farther away from his assignment. Did Jonah's recent actions disqualify him from ever again serving God in an official capacity?
Assignment, disqualify, official capacity. All of these terms represent modern organizational language that has been superimposed on an ancient fable to give it relevancy in serving the agenda of an authoritarian, top-down religious hierarchy.
No. Jehovah mercifully and lovingly renewed the prophet's commission.
Jonah did not see Nineveh as Jehovah did. Well, with all they were doing, how could he view them any differently? But the account says, when God saw they had turned back from their evil ways, he reconsidered the calamity, and he did not bring it. Despite the people's badness, Jehovah cared about them. He values human life and the potential that each individual has for repenting and learning to do what is right. Well, of course that's true. Why didn't Jonah see that?
Okay, there's a few things to talk about here. First of all, I'm no expert on film budgets and the costs of production and that kind of thing. That's not really my area, but I can't watch this without thinking this must have been very expensive for them to put together. I mean, obviously they're using some kind of green screen, maybe they're using some of the same equipment and processes that they used in the Hezekiah film. But even so, clearly a lot of money has been spent on this, on just these few minutes in the JW Broadcasting episode. And is it really worth it to make just this point that's being made? That's kind of my first observation. I'll leave that open for you to decide. But what I also notice is, how can I put this? It doesn't make any sense, this part of the Jonah story. Jonah gets sent to preach to the people of Nineveh to get them to repent. He gets sent to the Assyrians. The Assyrians are not covenanted to serve Yahweh. They are not in any kind of binding contract to serve Jehovah. But apparently they are still accountable to him. So Jonah gets sent and assumes the worst of them. But against Jonah's expectations, they all repent and suddenly everything's fine. But I struggle to understand how everything can be fine if they're all the way up in Nineveh, and according to the rules laid down in the Old Testament, the only way they can really be right with God is to be worshipping at the temple, is to be making the trek all the way down to Jerusalem at least once a year and making sacrifices to Jehovah. That is really, I mean, there's a huge long list of rules. There is no shortage of things that they really need to be doing apart from just being nice people, apart from just being good to each other. And that, again, for me, casts into serious doubt the historicity of the book of Jonah. Apart from all of the crazy stuff that happens, this just seems to be way too far-fetched. The other thing to notice is the sister that's portrayed here. She just has, maybe it's just me, but she just seems to have this judgmental streak. The way she says, well, with all they were doing, who could blame Jonah for judging them? That I could just imagine her having that same attitude with people in the congregation. And again, this is a fictitious character. I'm extrapolating what she would be like in a congregation. But I think we can all identify with that kind of personality, and it's something you see often in Jehovah's Witness congregations. Again, people analysing one another, and rather than focusing on their own relationship with God, they're preoccupied with, well, what are they doing? What are they doing? You know, how can I keep up with the Joneses? How can I, be one up on them? And it's very natural human behaviour, but there is absolutely nothing spiritual about it.
As long as I still can, I'll keep sacrificing to God. Salvation is from Jehovah.
Earlier in this dramatization, the woman who is here speaking is revealed to have a very serious illness that may be terminal. "O Jehovah, how can I do this by myself?" she asks. Later, she reflects on the account of Jonah praying to God from the belly of the fish and resolves to imitate Jonah's faith by similarly relying on God. While it is good for people with terminal illness to stay positive and to continue to find fulfillment in life, this otherwise uplifting message is warped by Watchtower into something altogether more selfish and exploitative. Rather than making the most of their final moments, Jehovah's Witnesses who may be staring death in the face are urged to prioritize serving the organization right to the bitter end, in the hope that by doing so, their salvation is assured.
In the Netherlands, many brothers and sisters assisted with the construction of the Swifterbond Assembly Hall. Some had to make adjustments to be able to work on this project.
And as we are about to learn, when Robert Luccioni talks about witnesses making adjustments, what he means is witnesses who have sacrificed their jobs, homes, or businesses to better serve the organization.
Listen, however, to their comments on the blessings they received and what their goals are now that the project is completed.
In the Netherlands, there was a need for a new, suitable assembly hall, which could accommodate almost all of the 300 congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses. More than 200 volunteers worked on this project. What challenges did they face? And what blessings did they receive?
We had to sell our house and close our business.
Whoa! They needed to sell their house and close their business so that an assembly hall could be built. I mean, this does not make Watchtower look good. I'm sorry. Watchtower must know that not just Jehovah's Witnesses watch these videos, but many people who are just interested in the religion. And when you have a religion kind of almost boasting about the fact that it can manipulate people to to sell their houses and give up their businesses, just so an assembly hall can be built, I can't see what's positive about that. I can't see how someone would see that and think, I really need to join this religion, because I too would really love to sell my house and give up my business so that I can build something. But again, this is the level of sacrifice that Watchtower really expects of Jehovah's Witnesses. You need to be able to give up everything.
Had to quit my job.
It was exciting to step out of my comfort zone and rely completely on Jehovah.
Relying completely on an entity whose existence cannot be proven, let alone its connections to a group of men in New York, to the extent of giving up your home or your employment, could be described as exciting. It could also be described as reckless and foolish, but this is exactly the kind of gamble Watchtower expects witnesses to take in furthering its interests.
Working on yourself, your Christian personality, and cooperating with your brothers and sisters, that has everlasting value.
Unpaid manual labour on Watchtower construction projects is sold to witnesses as the perfect opportunity for them to work on their deficiencies and strive to become the perfect worshipper.
This was a wonderful training for the future, when we will be building together in paradise.
Another bonus of helping Watchtower build lots of stuff is that building skills will be in demand once the entire planet has been laid waste at Armageddon and 99% of its human population slaughtered. What better way to train yourself for building idyllic timber frame homes over the corpses of billions of men, women and children than to help Watchtower build a steel and concrete assembly hall in the Netherlands.
You realize that everyone sacrifices something and becomes happier. No one regrets their decision.
Of course, nobody is likely to regret their decision if they have been indoctrinated to believe that the supreme creator of the universe needs them to build lucrative facilities for his chosen New York-based organisation. The only possible way they could regret sacrificing their time and energy to serving Watchtower would be if they were to wake up and realise they're being taken advantage of by an exploitative, manipulative cult.
Visitors or contractors were always very surprised that there were so many women working at the construction site.
Here we go. Now we're being expected to view Jehovah's Witnesses as an organisation that promotes gender equality because contractors in the Netherlands were surprised to find that a significant number of unpaid volunteers at a building project for a religious movement were women. In reality, as any Jehovah's Witness will have to admit, women are not treated as equals in the organisation. If anything, Watchtower falls over itself in the extent to which women are deemed unfit to perform even the most menial of congregation duties, from dispensing literature to operating sound equipment. If a pole has a microphone on the end of it, women are not expected to trouble themselves with its use, but take the microphone off the pole and replace it with a mop head, and suddenly a Jehovah's Witness female is qualified to put it into use in the Kingdom Hall. This is the reason why women are seen in abundance at Watchtower building sites, because when it comes to manual labour, there is no end to the work the organisation will allow women to busy themselves with. But when it comes to anything that remotely involves sharing ideas or opinions, women must take a back seat and let men do the talking.
It's great working with sisters. I have a construction background and communication with men can be really upfront. That doesn't work with sisters. You just have to be calm, talk and listen.
I hope I'm not the only one who found this part more than a bit sexist. It is strongly implied that women workers are not the same as men workers because they are high maintenance and you can't be upfront with them without running the risk of causing upset. I'm sure there will be no shortage of women watching this video who are direct, no-nonsense communicators who do not need to be handled with kid gloves, and who will therefore justifiably take issue with the somewhat demeaning and misogynistic sweeping generalisation.
The atmosphere was amazing, and we all had a great time.
Eventually, we were in Zwifterband for 1 month only.
Then we went to Mozambique for 3 months.
Then for 5 months to Zwifterband again.
Then 3 months South Africa.
Bethel called and assigned us to Congo-Kinshasa.
Join our cult, see the world. Seriously, I'm not sure what the arrangements are for these couples who've been to these exotic locations. It could be that they had to pay for their air tickets. It could be that Watchtower paid for the air tickets. But regardless, you know, it's being sold now, this whole building thing, as though it's this wonderful travel opportunity. Go to all these far-flung places with Watchtower. No, they're going there to build. It's not a holiday. They're having to roll their sleeves up and do hard manual labour because, again, the God of the universe just can't get enough buildings. He really, really needs things to be built.
All the volunteers who helped to make a success of this project, well, they had to give up a lot. As a result, we can enjoy this beautiful hall.
It's amazing to be here. It's great to be encouraged and to be strengthened for the ministry.
If you think about it, every day we have around 700 new brothers and sisters. That means every 3 days we can fill a hall like this with new brothers and sisters. These kind of halls are really needed worldwide in order to provide education to all those additional brothers and sisters.
Okay, just hold on there, Bjorn. Just slow down there. That is very, very clever, but we've just seen some quite cynical skewing of figures to give a false impression, apparently intended to persuade Jehovah's Witnesses that even more assembly halls are needed. Let's just reverse back and see what Bjorn just said. He said, well, there's 700 new Jehovah's Witnesses every day. I was trying to figure out where he got this figure from. Now, if you go to the 2017 yearbook, it gives you the total baptisms for 2016. And the total baptisms were 264,535. And if you divide that figure by 365, you get 725. What Bjorn has deliberately not done is rely on far more accurate figures which are available to give an impression of how many people are joining the organisation as a net figure. And you can find those figures in the average publisher numbers. So, for example, in 2015, the organisation's average publishers was 7,987,279. And that figure went up by 145,079 to 8,132,358 in 2016. Now that gives you, on a day-by-day basis, that gives you a net increase of 397, which is significantly less than 700. Now, in case you're thinking, which you may well be, well, 397 is still quite impressive. Yes, it is impressive, but we have to remember this is an organisation that is built to draw in new converts. Its whole setup is geared towards evangelism and pulling in as many people as possible. And what's interesting is that despite all of the different avenues for drawing in new Jehovah's Witnesses, you've got cart witnessing. That's only been going on since 2012. You've got jw.org, which again was revamped or introduced in 2012. Before that, you didn't have very good websites at all. Since 2012, this gleaming web presence. Since 2014, you've had a renewed emphasis on videos. In fact, they've really thrown themselves at videos, and videos, as we know, can be very, very compelling ways of reaching people and persuading people. So especially since October 2014, you've had JW Broadcasting and these really kind of heart-tugging propaganda videos. Despite all of those resources being thrown at the preaching work, what's very interesting is when you look at the ratio of hours to baptisms, and I'm sure I've shown this in a recent video, but I'm going to show it again. Look at the curve on the graph. This is a page from my book. It's based on a graph that you can find on jwfacts.com. And what's interesting is that every year more hours are needed to produce one baptism. More and more time and energy is needed to persuade someone to become a Jehovah's Witness. And what that tells me is that it's virtually impossible nowadays to convince people to become Jehovah's Witnesses through the traditional evangelical work. Why? Because of the internet. You know, if someone calls on your home and says, listen, I've got this fantastic insurance policy I want to sell you. You know, you'll get all of this money in the event of XYZ, and all you have to pay is peanuts per month. It's all fabulous. You'll maybe take their literature, but as soon as the door closes, if you're really interested in signing up to this insurance policy, what are you going to do first? You're going to go on Google, aren't you? Really? It would be silly not to. and you're going to do some research into the company and see what previous customers have to say or current customers have to say, and get as much objective information as you can. People are doing that with Jehovah's Witnesses. People who accept literature, either on the carts or on the doors, are Googling Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's why you see that curve in the amount of hours that's needed to convince someone to get baptized. People are still getting baptized, but what I would really like to see, if we could somehow visualize in the way Bjorn describes, if we could somehow visualize those 397 people who were joining every day in 2016, I would love to have a look, because I would bet you any money that the vast majority of them are kids, are children. Look at all the child indoctrination measures that Watchtower is implementing and persuading parents to coerce their children into getting baptized at ever younger ages. The other thing to notice is that, as impressive as it may sound that there were 397 people net joining the Witnesses per day in 2016, that still only represented a 1.8% growth for the organisation in 2016. 1.8%. That is nothing to be shouting about at all. I mean, the population growth rate, purely the mechanism whereby new people are born and people die, just that is somewhere around 1%. So you're only talking about a minuscule improvement on the population growth rate, which again tells us that the growth of Jehovah's Witnesses is purely down, or at least mostly down, to child indoctrination. Finally, just one more thing on this. I find it interesting that the Netherlands is being used to make this case for the growth of Jehovah's Witnesses, because last year, let's go to 2015. In 2015, in the Netherlands, there were 29,508 average Jehovah's Witnesses. By 2016, that number had gone down to 29,490, so 18 less in 2016 than in 2015. The Netherlands was one of many European countries where the Witnesses actually saw a reduction. So again, Bjorn's statistics are disingenuous, because he's speaking about an assembly hall in the Netherlands, and he's using that as an example. But if we were just going to use the Netherlands as an example, there would have been nobody sat in the assembly hall. Bear in mind, the assembly hall is for the Netherlands. There would have been actually just over -1 per month in the Netherlands. And this is not just a European thing, we saw it as well. Canada had less witnesses in 2016. Australia had less witnesses. I think New Zealand had less witnesses. So I'm quite encouraged, not discouraged, when I look at Watchtower statistics, and they are telling me that the very best you can say is that growth is stagnating for Jehovah's Witnesses, but I am actually hopeful that it won't be long before we actually either see reductions or the reductions are concealed.
Did you notice a common thread in the volunteers' comments? Any economic concerns they may have had just faded in the background, didn't they? They reached out to help, and in turn, Jehovah helped them.
As if the message isn't already clear, Luccioni is sure to drive home the importance of witnesses being willing to sacrifice everything for Watchtower, on the assumption that Jehovah will swoop to the rescue and provide some form of reimbursement. Without wanting to repeat the arguments I've already made ad nauseum in previous videos, if Jehovah is an interventionist God who will step in and reward people with jobs and financial security in exchange for their readiness to serve him, then he also needs to intervene in cases of human death and suffering. Apart from anything else, how can you even become a Jehovah's Witness and start building kingdom halls and assembly halls if you've been killed in an earthquake as a 3-year-old? Either God actively intervenes in earth's affairs, or he doesn't. You cannot have it both ways.
Another example that may come to your mind is that of King David. As we know, King David committed serious sins. Yet David repented for his sins, and there is no record that he repeated them. How did Jehovah view him? Did Jehovah see David as damaged, as a man who would always be limited in serving him? Notice Jehovah's words directed to King Jeroboam at 1 Kings chapter 14 and verse 8. But you have not become like my servant David, who kept my commandments and who walked after me with all his heart, doing only what was right in my eyes. Jehovah viewed David as a special servant. He says he kept my commandments. He did what was right in my eyes. That's what Jehovah remembered. How encouraging that is for us. If we have repented of our past mistakes and set matters straight to the best of our circumstances, we too can be assured that Jehovah loves us dearly.
Personally, I don't find the story of David and Bathsheba remotely endearing. A king arranges the death of one of his soldiers to conceal his adulterous affair with the soldier's wife, and then God announces that he can be forgiven so long as he's willing to accept a list of penalties, the most significant of which is the death of the baby boy that resulted from the affair, as recorded at 2 Samuel 12, verses 12 to 23. Any God who finds himself unable to forgive someone unless he first gets to murder a baby deserves no respect whatsoever. The murder of an innocent child is just as, if not more egregious, than David's adultery and subsequent dispatch of Uriah to certain death in battle. There is also a moral problem with the whole issue of mercy and repentance. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that someone who neglects to become a witness is deserving of death at Armageddon. However, a Jehovah's Witness pedophile can rape a child, and so long as he is deemed repentant, Jehovah will spare his life at Armageddon, and he will get to live forever on paradise earth. A paradise earth that has been fashioned over the corpses of billions who have been slaughtered simply for not acknowledging the divine mandate of a New York-based religious movement. In short, the concept of mercy and repentance is neither fair nor admirable. It provides a loophole, a get-out-of-jail card, whereby the very worst of humanity gets to leapfrog to the front of the line simply for making the right propitiations and surrendering their critical thinking skills. This arrangement is many things, but it is certainly not moral.
So what's the point? Well, our past or our present circumstances do not define our value before Jehovah. Our Father loves us for who we are.
Jehovah loves us for who we are on condition that we are unquestioning followers of the governing body. It is our readiness to follow their direction that determines our value in the eyes of the Creator of the universe.
Please read with me 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 7. But Jehovah said to Samuel, "Do not pay attention to his appearance and how tall he is, for I have rejected him. For the way man sees is not the way God sees, because mere man sees what appears to the eyes, but Jehovah sees into the heart." That's the way Jehovah sees. He does not look at our outward appearance and our abilities. He sees into our heart. He sees what we would be doing if all the limitations were lifted off of us.
So just to give you a bit of context, We're now considering a verse in 1 Samuel where the prophet Samuel has been to see Jesse, the father of David, and he's gone to inspect Jesse's sons, and he's cast his eyes on Eliab, one of David's brothers, and he's convinced that Eliab is the one he's been sent to anoint. And God says to Samuel, do not pay attention to his appearance and how tall he is, for I have rejected him, for the way man sees is not the way God sees, because mere man sees what appears to the eyes, but Jehovah sees into the heart. And I just found it very strange for Robert Luccioni to read this verse, because this verse is unrecognizable in terms of what it's suggesting for Jehovah's Witnesses. What it's suggesting is that the appearance isn't what counts. What counts is what's inside. And I struggle to think of a Christian denomination that is more obsessed with appearance, that is more obsessed with how people look. Jehovah's Witnesses can't get enough of it. Oh, if you're a man, don't you dare have a beard. You know, why have you got a beard? You should have shaved, brother. Your hair's a bit too long. Why don't you cut your hair? Why aren't you wearing a suit and tie? If you're a sister, why are you wearing pants? You shouldn't be wearing pants. You should be wearing a skirt. All of that flies in the face of what this verse is saying. What this verse is saying is, it doesn't matter. God isn't interested in your appearance. He's interested in what's inside. So I just couldn't read this without thinking, if only Jehovah's Witnesses were to actually apply what this scripture is saying, it would probably be a little bit more tolerable to be one.
Have you ever wondered, does Jehovah really see me? Does he see what's in my heart and value my desire to do more for him? The answer is yes. In fact, Jehovah has already seen what is in your heart. Think about this. Why are you watching this program?
That's easy. To remind myself of the many reasons why I left this manipulative, exploitative, destructive cult.
Why do you care about spiritual things? Why are you perhaps the only one in your family who's a dedicated baptized servant of Jehovah? Or why are you perhaps the only one in your place of employment, or the only one near where you live who's serving Jehovah? Is it because you're so much more studious or smarter than everyone else? No. Haggai chapter 2 and verse 7 tells us that Jehovah will shake all the nations, and the precious things of the nations will come in. John chapter 6 verse 44 says that no man can come to Jesus unless the Father draws him. Jeremiah chapter 31 verse 3. Jehovah says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. That is why I have drawn you. So again, why are you serving Jehovah? Because Jehovah loves you. Jehovah drew you. As he was shaking the nations, he looked down into your heart and he saw something very precious and he drew you to him. He says, I want to draw this person to my son. I want to draw this person to me. I love this person.
This part of Robert Luccioni's little sermon is just fascinating because it's something that keeps getting returned to, but not, I feel, fully explored. And that's this concept of Jehovah drawing people to him. So Robert Luccioni is essentially trying to encourage Jehovah's Witnesses who may feel discouraged by making them feel special. And he's saying, you know, even if you're just watching this episode, that proves that there is something special about you. And when I say special, what I mean is God has actually selected you. And Robert Luccioni quotes 3 scriptures, one of which is Haggai 2 verse 7 about Jehovah shaking the nations. And Robert Luccioni says, you know, Jehovah's been shaking the nations so that he can get you. Maybe one or two others as well, but you have been drawn. And he quotes from John 6:44, nobody comes to me unless the Father draws him. I just wish Jehovah's Witnesses would think about these verses and what they imply, because they're basically describing, at least to me, they are describing predestination. They are describing a God who has already decided who he wants to follow him. And so basically everyone else is just wasting their time. They're using up oxygen while they wait to be destroyed. Now, what's wrong about this? Well, let's just think about John 6:44. Nobody comes to me unless the Father draws him. Let's think about Jehovah's Witnesses for a moment and think about geographically where they can be found. Where are you likely to find a Jehovah's Witnesses if you spin the globe? Can you just put a pin anywhere and you're going to find Jehovah's Witnesses? Clearly not. Clearly you have a much better chance of finding a Jehovah's Witness if you land in America, or if you land in Canada, or if you land in Australia, or if you land in Britain. Those are all countries with reasonably respectable ratios of Jehovah's Witnesses. The same cannot be said of many, many Asian, Middle Eastern, communist, Arab countries where there are next to no Jehovah's Witnesses. What does that tell us if we take this scripture literally? This thing about Jehovah shaking the nations, all of the nations he's shaking apparently. It tells us that Jehovah is more interested in having Europeans, Americans, Australians, Africans, people from those parts of the world. He's more interested in having them than people, say, from China or North Korea or Somalia or Tunisia or Iraq, or these parts of the world he's really not quite so interested in. And that is just something I wish Jehovah's Witnesses would think of more, because it's supposed to be this organization where it's worldwide and it's global and all of the nations are going to be, equally considered, and God is not partial and God is equally interested in, no, not at all. Not if you look at the demographics of Jehovah's Witnesses. That is just simply not the case. Jehovah, according to this scripture, is an awful racist because he disproportionately favors people from parts of the world like the Americas, like Africa, like Europe, and he's not so interested in large swathes of Asia. Now, that's one thing I wanted to say on this. Another thing I wanted to say was kind of going into predestination in a little bit more detail, because you could look at those scriptures and you could say, well, that's not talking about predestination, that's talking about God choosing who will worship him. But this kind of ties in a little bit with a really fascinating podcast episode on the Joe Rogan podcast. And just in the last week or so, he had Megan Phelps-Roper on his show. And Megan did a fantastic interview where she talked about her experience growing up in the Westboro Baptist Church. And there was a fascinating part where she described the verses that convinced her that she could no longer call herself Christian. Take a look.
Well, how does God allow all the, sodomy and all the crazy shit going on? Why does God allow that?
So this is why I'm not a Christian anymore.
Oh, you got confused. And you're like, what the?
Well, so there's this passage in Romans 9. Well, it's not the only reason, I should say, but I have real trouble with this, and I think it's still hard for me to say, I think this is evil, but I think this is evil. There's this passage in Romans 9 that talks about, it gives this analogy of God as potter and humans as clay in his hands. And it uses the example of Jacob and Esau, who in the Bible, Jacob and Esau were twins. And says, while they were yet in the womb, before either of them had done good or evil, God loved Jacob and hated Esau. And so it paints this picture of God, it says, what if God, willing to show his wrath and make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath made for destruction. So it says God created some people as vessels of mercy, people that he loves, and others as vessels of wrath made for destruction. So made for the express purpose of destroying them, of torturing them in hell for eternity. It's Paul who's writing, he paints this picture, God making you do all of the things that you do, and then blessing some and cursing others. And he says, well, you're going to ask me then, why does God yet find fault for who has resisted his will? Right? So if God's making you do it, why is he punishing you for it?
Right. If God's making you do a horrible thing and you resist his will.
You can't resist his will.
Right.
And so he makes you do it, and then he punishes you for it. And the answer is, you don't get to ask that question.
Oh.
It says, nay, but O man, who art thou that repliest against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? You just don't get to ask that question. And to me, I've asked, I spent a long time talking to Christians and, people of, mostly Christians, because it's New Testament. But also talking to Jewish people about the Old Testament, and found so many of the interpretations, so many of our beliefs they're not fully supported by the Bible, and that there are so many different ways of interpreting so many of the more destructive of our beliefs. But that one, I have not found any explanation for that passage that's anything that makes any kind of sense, that's consistent with the text and not evil. And I thought I couldn't ask that question for so long when I was at the church, right? I thought I just have to accept this is the truth, and nothing that I feel or think matters against it. But now I can't not think.
Of course.
I cannot ask the questions.
So I watched this the other day, and probably like you now, hopefully, I was just blown away by that. Because, well, first of all, one thing that is obvious if you watch the whole interview, and I would strongly encourage you to do that, it's a long interview, it's like 2 hours, 40 minutes. One thing that's obvious about Megan is that she knows her Bible. Boy, does she know her Bible. I would say that Megan knows her Bible better than the majority of elders. She certainly knows her Bible better than I do. And I did encounter this verse, but I never connected the dots. I never was able to draw those conclusions about what is said. And it's there in black and white that God creates people as vessels of destruction. And to really clarify and crystallize that concept, as Megan says, you have the account of Jacob and Esau, and God decides that he hates Esau while he's still in the womb, before he's even done anything. If that's not describing predestination, I don't know what is. I mean, how clearer could you be? Just to kind of give this some context, we've gone from what Robert Luccioni was saying about God selecting people, about God shaking the nations. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness, then good news. That means that you're one of the people who God has filtered out of humanity. You're one of the lucky ones that got chosen for the privilege of being a Jehovah's Witness. Let's carry that on to what Megan's just said. It gets even deeper than that. It's not just that you have been chosen for being a good person since you were a baby. God actually is creating people as both good and evil. The selection process begins in the womb. That just blows my mind. And I agree with Megan. It's difficult to read that verse and not see a cruel, capricious creator who creates people for the express purpose of destroying them. What kind of God is that? How is a creator who does that worth any kind of respect or worship? I have no idea. So we're kind of going into the atheist part of my content now, but I just felt it was worthwhile showing you what the end game is in what Robert Luccioni was saying. If you're going to start talking in terms of God choosing people, selecting people, you need to address predestination. You need to address why there's such a disproportionate number of Jehovah's Witnesses in certain parts of the world. And you need to address what the hell this scripture's talking about when it talks about vessels created for destruction and God deciding in the womb that Esau was bad.
Thousands of refugees who face severe hardships in their home countries have sought shelter in parts of Europe. Watch how Jehovah has lovingly assured them that they're not alone by satisfying their spiritual thirst.
Welcome to Greece. We really feel that Jehovah is blessing us by opening a large door of opportunities to preach the good news to the many refugees who are streaming into the country.
Not for the first time in a JW Broadcasting episode, Watchtower congratulates itself for exploiting the desperate plight of refugees fleeing war and political unrest. Any religious organisation that preys on emotionally vulnerable people and capitalises on their woes as an opportunity for evangelism should be ashamed of itself. But for Watchtower, this is apparently a source of great pride. Also, notice how Jehovah is credited for opening a large door of opportunities. Having made such a bizarre claim, it behooves the governing body to explain exactly what is meant by this. Did Jehovah really orchestrate events in Syria just so its shell-shocked, displaced population would have a better chance of becoming Jehovah's Witnesses?
The refugee shelters in our area have only families with children and are located near a military airport. Whenever military planes flew overhead and the children would see and hear them, they would immediately run and try to hide because they were afraid. They sought protection from the tragic conditions they had experienced during warfare. This impressed upon us how greatly they needed the comforting message of the good news, so we felt the urge to approach them.
Most people, on seeing needy children traumatized by war, would be moved to give them food and shelter, or even just a listening ear and a hand of friendship. Jehovah's Witnesses, on the other hand, are trained to see this as an opportunity to rope impressionable minds into their belief system. Indeed, they feel an urge to exploit this situation. How humane of them.
After we received permission from the branch office, we also printed thousands of tracts since we did not have enough. This whole effort created an atmosphere of enthusiasm.
I found this part interesting because I have long pondered what would happen if Watchtower were forced to abandon printing altogether due to financial constraints. It seems that, at least in this case, witnesses are already printing their own literature to compensate for lack of availability from the branch. If downsizing continues at its current momentum, expect do-it-yourself printing to become more of a thing.
I'm deeply moved when I see how lovingly Jehovah cares for these people who have never had the opportunity to hear the kingdom message that gives them a future and a hope.
A hope that, having already fled one authoritarian regime accused of massacring its political opponents, they get to spend eternity praising a supreme ruler for the biggest act of genocide the world will ever have seen.
It was exciting for them to hear that we have a Bible-based video in their language. We told them that the problems, calamities, and the terrible war they had experienced were not punishment from God, but the result of the influence Satan the devil exercises over this system of things. And this provided a good answer to their question.
So, bewildered, shell-shocked refugees fleeing cruelty and violence on an unimaginable scale have been reassured that rather than God being responsible for their suffering, Satan is. Essentially, one lie has been substituted for another.
On a return visit, after 2 days, a refugee girl said something very touching. Now I understand why we have to go through all this. It's very difficult, but it's not God's fault.
I agree that it's not God's fault, but only because I have yet to be convinced that the God of the Bible exists, or indeed that any supreme being exists who takes a personal interest in Earth's affairs. If the God of the Bible were to exist, then technically he would be to blame for human suffering, because he has instituted a convoluted arrangement whereby the only way to eradicate human suffering is to allow it to flourish for thousands of years.
On another occasion, Gardinia, a refugee woman who showed interest, told us, "Since meeting you, I have a purpose in life. I have a reason to live. Until now, I was just waiting to die."
This story genuinely angers me because it highlights perfectly why it is so grotesque for witnesses to prey on traumatized survivors of war. A woman who is just waiting to die needs practical help, including professional counselling for what sounds like acute depression that could very well eventuate in suicide. Instead, Jehovah's Witnesses have swooped in and given her false promises of future bliss and happiness that will only compound her misery once the woman realises she's been lied to.
About 2.5 years ago, I met Mustafa. He attended the meetings and made speedy progress. Mustafa was baptized a few months before the refugees started pouring in. We do not believe that this was a coincidence.
No JW Broadcasting episode would be complete without Jehovah's hand being invoked, either to account for some mundane achievement, or, as in this case, to explain what is clearly a complete coincidence. Look, I've made this argument so many times that I'm now at risk of seriously boring people through continually repeating myself, but allow me to spell it out once more for any newcomers to my channel. Either God intervenes in Earth's affairs or he doesn't. If he indeed engineered events so that an Arabic-speaking man named Mustafa would become a witness just in time to preach to a surge of Arabic-speaking Syrian refugees entering Greece, then we need to know why he hasn't intervened on occasions when doing so would have been far more urgent, such as stopping the conflict in Syria from erupting in the first place.
We are so grateful to Jehovah for opening a door leading to such wonderful activity. It gives us great joy and we praise him daily for this.
At the time this report was prepared, over 100 Bible studies had been started. One refugee told the brothers, "You are the best thing that has happened to us here in Greece. We thank Jehovah for meeting you." Another said, "We do not need material things. We need hope, and you are giving this to us through the Bible."
So I guess in summary, I have two main problems with this whole Greek Syrian refugee segment. The first is, as I mentioned, how is God responsible for all this? We've just heard that Jehovah opened this door of opportunity for these refugees to be preached to. How exactly did that happen? What are the mechanics? You know, if you're going to say it, explain exactly what you mean, because it sounds to me as though the implication is, well, the whole situation has been engineered. You know, the whole conflict in Syria, world events have been shaped so that these refugees can find themselves in Greece and have an opportunity to become Jehovah's Witnesses. Probably if you challenged the makers of this video on that, they would say, no, that's not what we mean at all. Well, what do you mean then? I'd like some clarification. If you're going to make such an outrageous claim, at least explain what you mean. The second thing that just really irritates me is the whole exploitative aspect. And really there's two ways in which this situation is being exploited. Firstly, the Syrian refugees are being exploited. I say Syrian refugees, I'm sure that they're not just all Syrian, I'm sure that they're from other parts of the Middle East as well. But for argument's sake, let's say Syrian refugees. They're in a desperate situation. They're traumatized. They're emotionally vulnerable. Some of them will have lost family members. Some of them will have lost children. And here they are being preyed upon by an organization that says, don't you worry, we have all the answers. Everything that you've lost, you can get back if you'll only join us. If you'll only follow us and follow our leaders in New York. What a grotesque way of capitalizing on human misery. And the other group of people who are being exploited here are, of course, the Jehovah's Witnesses themselves, because this is all intended as propaganda. The whole thing is being set up to say to Jehovah's Witnesses, look how wonderful the organization is. Look at how it's reaching out to these poor, desperate people and giving them hope. But what's interesting is that Watchtower is by no means done in patting itself on the back for leaping to the rescue in times of calamity. We're now going to take a look at another segment in the JW Broadcasting episode where we are led to believe that Jehovah's Witnesses are also fantastic when it comes to practical care, when it comes to humanitarian relief. Take a look.
In this next report, see what's been done to care for faithful brothers and sisters in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
The branch sees where there is a need and then organizes a humanitarian mission.
I believe I can use my medical skills to help our brothers. It is love, not just in writing, but in action.
It's a real joy to help these brothers who need us in remote locations, far from towns. It is always a pleasure.
Well, the two are the same. Both eardrums are completely perforated.
I can't bear to see anyone suffer, so I use all my skills to try to find a solution.
What moves me to help the brothers is what Jesus said, that there is more happiness in giving than in receiving.
These are mosquito nets for those in need, and there's a big need here, so we give them to each family.
You know, to protect your baby, one of the best things is for him to sleep under a mosquito net.
Jehovah has done well because he has gone through you to provide us with care.
We are very grateful. We thank the many brothers who have volunteered to serve us. I thank Jehovah because without him, our identifying mark of unity wouldn't exist.
The brothers are aware that they must thank Jehovah, and we ourselves are aware that all of this is possible thanks to Jehovah's Holy Spirit and his organization.
How heartwarming. Those dear ones are not defined by their circumstances. They have been serving Jehovah whole soul despite their challenges, and they're determined to use the relief assistance to continue worshiping Him.
Probably like me, you were watching that segment and thinking, what's not to like about this? What is not to like about Jehovah's Witnesses who are doctors, who are medical professionals, going out to parts of Africa, distributing medicine, distributing mosquito nets, performing examinations, and helping these, poor people who wouldn't normally have access to these things? What's not to like about that? That is what all religions should aspire to. And I agree. However, there's just kind of one problem here. Well, there's two problems, but I'll come to the other one later. It's just for Jehovah's Witnesses. How is it anything to brag about if a religion looks after its own? Sends people to care for only those who share their beliefs in an impoverished part of the world. And I'm sure I've used this scripture before, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but it's Matthew 5:46 and 47 from the 2013 edition. It says, "For if you love those loving you, what reward do you have? Are not also the tax collectors doing the same thing? And if you greet your brothers only, what extraordinary thing are you doing? Are not also the people of the nations doing the same thing?" I don't understand how Watchtower can indulge in self-congratulation on this, can pat itself on the back for doing the opposite of what these words imply, by only caring and only showing love and concern and support for people who are prepared to, bend their knee to the governing body. That's not what Christian love is supposed to be about. But we can go even further, if you like, in the Bible, because in the very next chapter, in Matthew 6, verse 2, Jesus says, "So when you make gifts of mercy," and when he says gifts of mercy, he's talking about donations, about giving to the poor and the underprivileged. He's talking about charitable work. He says, "So when you make gifts of mercy, do not blow a trumpet ahead of you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be glorified by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full." I don't know how. I mean, surely these verses must be considered at some level by Watchtower, and yet they go and do the exact opposite. This whole segment about Africa and about giving provisions only to Jehovah's Witnesses, it's blowing a trumpet. It's saying, look how wonderful we are. We surely must be God's one and only true religion if we're flying out to Africa and handing out medication and mosquito nets. Who else would conceive of doing such a thing? Well, what's interesting is that if you go on YouTube and fish around at other propaganda videos from other cults, because it's a very common thing for cults to produce propaganda material. Let's take a look at one such video, and it's from Scientology. So let's see an example of a similar video about relief work that's been produced by the Church of Scientology.
When everybody else during the Haiti quake was saying, you cannot land in Haiti, you cannot go to Haiti, I get a telephone call. It was the Church of Scientology, volunteer ministers, and the voice on the other end says, I heard you guys are trying to get to Haiti. Take some of your people to Hangar 4 JFK and look for the volunteer ministers in yellow jackets. We're gonna help you get to Haiti. And we landed in Port-au-Prince, delivered babies, set fractures, and treated thousands of patients together. There is no doubt in my mind that if it wasn't for some of the volunteer ministers being on the scene to assist our medical personnel, those patients would have died.
So that's Scientology. Now we're going to take a look at a similar video by the Exclusive Brethren.
And it's very impressive. They not only look after themselves, but also reach out to the community and touch lives in so many ways. And that is very impressive.
The Brethren community engages in many activities as part of a commitment to the public good. The Rapid Relief Team, or RRT as it's known, is on call 24/7 to provide emergency workers at major incidents with hot food and refreshments. The RRT provided round-the-clock support after a tragic helicopter crash in Glasgow in November 2013. Andy Bates, Chief Superintendent of Greater Glasgow Police, spoke appreciatively.
If you want people to be working what is a fairly monotonous job, maybe standing on a cordon for 8 hours, if you can take them away every now and again, keep them warm, give them a cup of tea, give them a bacon roll, then they're going to go back and it's not only what you've served, it's actually the way you've done it. It's been the smiling face, the welcome, the really, really good reception they've received from you that they've really appreciated.
So it's no strange thing for cults, for high control religious movements to fall over themselves, to congratulate themselves for doing charitable work, to use charitable work as a recruitment tool, to say, look at how wonderful we are. Look at how we're helping all of these people. We're handing out sandwiches to police officers. We're helping firefighters go to Haiti and help out there when there's an earthquake. You know, how are we not the one true religion? Because look at what we're doing. Watchtower's doing exactly the same thing, and it's frankly distasteful. It's exploiting, again, in the same way as we saw with the Syrian refugee crisis. It's exploiting human tragedy and calamity and using it as a recruitment tool, saying, look what we've done in these situations. But what's interesting is when you look at the Scientology clip and the Exclusive Brethren clip, I'm sure there are other cults that I could use. I'm just using those two examples for now. What's interesting is that they're not choosy when it comes to who they help. They're not choosy, that they're not giving out sandwiches to only fellow Exclusive Brethren. They're not going to Haiti to help only Scientologists. They're interested in helping anyone, whatever their religious preferences are. They're just interested in doing some relief work. And again, they're exploiting it, make no mistake, they're exploiting it as a recruitment tool, but at the very least, they can say, we're not discriminating, we're giving help to everyone. Jehovah's Witnesses can't say that. Watchtower can't say that. So I'm afraid that, as impressive as it may seem on a first watch, when you start comparing it with what other similar groups are doing, it doesn't square up at all. And the truth is that there is much, much more that Watchtower could be doing with its resources to help underprivileged people in parts of the world where aid and relief is very sorely needed.
Things that have happened to you can't change, but your personality you can. And we can change our personality with Jehovah's help.
Non-Jehovah's Witnesses watching this, please take note. If you join the religion, you are expected to change your personality. In other words, become a different person. But this isn't a cult or anything.
By the time I was 25, I was associating with notorious criminals. I guess I was a criminal too. Just took a wrong turn and kept going.
Anyone who follows Jim's example of leaving Jehovah's Witnesses risks becoming a criminal. After all, aren't all worldly people supposed to be thieves, alcoholics, and drug addicts?
I remember a happier time in my life. My mom would take us to meetings. I was in the theocratic ministry school. All the friends were so loving.
As with so many personal testimonies on JW Broadcasting, we are being given a story of someone raised as a witness who left the religion, but whose indoctrination was so powerful that he was convinced the religion was the truth long after leaving. The fact that Jim's childhood memories were a factor in his yearning to return to the religion does not make the religion or any of its beliefs true. It merely highlights that cult indoctrination is very powerful and can linger in your mind for years or even decades after you think you've walked away.
I pulled out the box from under my bunk. Right on top was a book, The Truth That Leads to Eternal Life. And at that moment, I knew Jehovah hadn't forgotten me. I remembered that book. I remembered that book when I was a boy. I placed that book out in service.
Ah yes, the Truth Book. Younger viewers will perhaps be unaware that there were two versions of this book, one printed in 1968 and another in 1981. The 1968 version had a paragraph on page 9 hinting strongly that life on Earth would be inconceivable beyond 1975 unless God stepped in. The book says, back in 1960, a former United States Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, declared that our time is a period of unequaled instability, unequaled violence. And he warned, I know enough of what is going on to assure you that in 15 years from today, this world is going to be too dangerous to live in. Obviously, 1960 plus 15 brings you to 1975, a year that was long pointed to by Watchtower as being of great significance for those anticipating Armageddon. But when the 1981 version of the Truth Book came out, the text was cleverly edited to read, also, as reported back in 1960, a former United States Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, declared that our time is a period of unequaled instability, unequaled violence. Based on what he knew was then going on in the world, it was his conclusion that soon this world is going to be too dangerous to live in. Clearly, by this point, the prediction about 1975 had been ditched, so the text was reworded to make it more vague. Despite traces of the 1975 prediction being successfully removed, one false prediction that stayed in the 1981 Truth Book was that regarding the generation of 1914. As it said on page 95, but there are people still living who were alive in 1914 and saw what was happening then, and who were old enough that they still remember those events. This generation is getting up in years now. A great number of them have already passed away in death. Yet Jesus very pointedly said, this generation will by no means pass away until all these things occur. Some of them will still be alive to see the end of this wicked system. This means that only a short time is left before the end comes. So now is the time to take urgent action if you do not want to be swept away with this wicked system. Obviously, the 1914 generation who would not pass away are all now 6 feet under, but rather than take responsibility for its error, Watchtower has moved the goalposts by bringing in a succession of alternative explanations, the latest of which is the nonsensical overlapping generation teaching, which I won't bore you with now. Suffice to say, Watchtower would do very well to avoid any mention of the Truth Book, which is among the publications most guilty of making predictions that are demonstrably false. And Watchtower certainly has no right to ask anyone to forget about the original 1914 generation teaching, which was drilled into me as a JW youth. This false promise, issued repeatedly from Watchtower in no uncertain terms, helped form the basis of my decision to get baptized as an 11-year-old in 1990, a decision I continue to be held to this day through the abominable practice of shunning.
I'd only been there 5 minutes, and a guard comes in and said, "Are you a Jehovah's Witness?" I couldn't believe it. And I told him I been studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. And he said, "Oh, good, follow me." And I followed him, and he took me and introduced me to a brother who had been coming up there regularly to study the Bible with inmates there. And I realized at that moment that once again, Jehovah had not forgotten me.
Apparently, Jehovah loves dispatching witnesses to either find new witnesses, as in the case of Mustafa, or to convince former witnesses to return, as here. He just isn't so keen on intervening in meaningful ways by preventing death and suffering.
He started making tape recordings of the meetings. I'd listen to them over and over until the next week. I knew that if I was going to return to Jehovah, I had to make some adjustments.
As I've discussed in previous rebuttals, repetition is indeed a fantastic way, perhaps the only way, to make otherwise intelligent people believe in total nonsense.
The beard became a goatee, and then it just became a mustache. No drugs, no alcohol, no smoking, clean up my language.
I'm not aware of any JW Broadcasting episodes so far being quite so explicit in referring to the no beard rule. You would think if not having beards was so important, a vice akin to drugs, alcohol or smoking, depending on how you read into Jim's testimony, it would be worthwhile explaining clearly from the Bible just why it is that Jehovah's Witnesses aren't allowed beards. The makers of JW Broadcasting are unlikely to do this, of course, because apart from making them look even more cult-like than they already look, there is no Bible verse they can point to where God can be considered as revealing a preference for clean-shaven male worshippers. If anything, God hints strongly at an opposite preference if you read Leviticus 19 verse 27. As with many Watchtower teachings, the no beard rule finds no basis in Scripture. It is actually little more than an embarrassing vestige of the presidency of Joseph Rutherford, a despotic narcissist who could not tolerate anything that would remind him of his predecessor, Charles Taze Russell. For a longer discussion on this fascinating example of Watchtower pedantry, please see my video, Why the Ban on Beards.
One thing I kept praying for, and he's blessed me with, is to forgive myself, to have a clean conscience and freeness of speech. And he's done that.
Jim shares the same joy as so many others who return to Jehovah.
Jim is also clearly very emotional about his experience, as we have just seen. Isn't it interesting how so many personal testimonies in JW Broadcasting episodes show people either crying or on the verge of tears? It's almost as though Watchtower is deliberately trying to bypass logic and reason and appeal directly to the emotions of their audience. Speaking of emotions, nothing stirs people's feelings quite like a JW Broadcasting music video, especially one that is eerily reminiscent of a certain song from the movie Frozen.
This loneliness I feel inside is hard to bear. Jehovah, I can see where I went wrong. Feeling so downhearted, I need strength to carry on. I am yearning to be back where I belong.
According to Watchtower, those who leave the organisation spend the rest of their lives pining for it, mournfully looking at old photographs or cowering in the fetal position by the front door. The governing body simply cannot conceive of witnesses getting out of the organisation and living happy, contented lives once free of their indoctrination.
Even if I stumble, even if I fall, I can get back up. Everywhere I go, everything I see reminds me of the truth. The end is drawing near. So Jehovah, Father, please hear my prayer tonight and help me now. I'm in my time of need.
The governing body apparently relishes the idea of former witnesses living in terror and paranoia under the impression that Armageddon is coming any moment and there is a fireball with their name on it. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, Tony, Steve, Dave, Sam, Jeff, Mark and Gerrit, but while it is undoubtedly true that many former witnesses still hold on to the gruesome ideas you delight in filling people's heads with, a good number like myself have completely emancipated themselves from the morbid dread of fiery destruction and are much happier and more fulfilled for having done so.
I know Jehovah understands. Sometimes I need a helping hand.
Of course, a helping hand can mean disfellowshipping. Not everyone who walks away from the organisation continues to stick to the myriad rules and regulations enforced by Watchtower. If this lady has done anything that sufficiently displeases the governing body, and she isn't deemed to have shown enough repentance, she will need to first be disfellowshipped before finally being reinstated, a process that involves spending month after month attending meetings at the Kingdom Hall while being treated as though she is invisible by an entire congregation. Thankfully, it looks as though in this particular instance, the lady hasn't done anything too naughty during her time away, so all she needs to do is get her ass back to the Kingdom Hall and prepare to be love-bombed.
So I'm going to the hall tonight to feel the love I lost, back to where I know I belong. And even if I stumble, even if I fall, I will get back up.
Of course, there are some who will happily go back to being a witness just so they can retrieve that special feeling of community and shared purpose. But it's worth stressing that this is merely an illusion. If someone is your friend simply because you agree to share their beliefs, then they are really no friend at all. It's far better and more satisfying to surround yourself with people who love and cherish you for who you are. As daunting as it may be to rebuild your sense of community after leaving the witnesses, believe me, it is doable. It just takes commitment and patience. There will be bumps along the way, but the end product is well worth it and infinitely more valuable than anything Watchtower has to offer.
May we work hard to see ourselves as Jehovah does and be determined to never give up. May we never forget that it is the privilege of bearing Jehovah's name, having a relationship with Him, and our love for Jehovah that defines us. Jehovah is happy if we give the best that we can. So may we do our part by not limiting ourselves due to our circumstances, but always look for ways to give our best to Jehovah.
When it comes to serving Jehovah, or more accurately, serving Jehovah's organization, only the best will do. If you're not pioneering, you should be thinking about pioneering. If you're pioneering, you should be thinking about doing missionary work or serving where the need is greater. There really is no finishing line when it comes to pursuing a career as a witness. No let up in what is asked of you. From the moment you become an unbaptized publisher, you are essentially put on an unending hamster wheel, with the best never quite being good enough. I can't describe how satisfying it is once you step off the hamster wheel and stop allowing unquestioned loyalty to an organization to define you.
You can pray for your brothers and sisters. We need your prayers. Pray for the governing body. Pray for those who are taking the lead. Pray for the elders in your congregations. Pray for those who are going through difficult times.
Not for the first time, we are told that the governing body needs our prayers. While I'm sure they will feel they need all the help they can get, I can never quite understand why anyone should need to ask Jehovah to help a group of men he has apparently already chosen to bless. If it's possible for Jehovah to stop blessing the governing body, or to not bless them sufficiently, does this also mean it's possible for the governing body to be wrong or no longer worthy of being followed?
No matter who we are, and whatever our situation in life, may we find joy in giving what we can for Jehovah. And may each one of us rejoice at the privilege we have of being part of what Jehovah is accomplishing in these last days.
That, I'm afraid, in a nutshell, is what being a Jehovah's Witness is all about. It's give, give, give. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. What does Watchtower give in return? Well, it will give you false hope of eternal bliss in a future paradise that it has absolutely no chance of being able to deliver on. It will give you a sense of community, but it's a false sense of community because it's based on conditional love. You'll get love bombed by people who would leave you in a moment if you stopped sharing their beliefs. I can't think of what else you would get from being a Jehovah's Witness that makes it worthwhile, that compensates for the fact that you're essentially indulging in a false belief system, in a belief system that fundamentally is not true. We hear a lot about the best life ever, and you'll occasionally hear Jehovah's Witnesses say, and just the fact that they can say this, I feel, says a lot, but they'll perhaps say, well, even if it wasn't true, it's still a fantastic way of life. Well, as I've said before, the best life ever quickly becomes no life at all if you're in a situation where you need blood. So that alone really debunks that claim. But even if you, I mean, you might say, well, that's a very rare occurrence. It's unlikely that you'll find yourself in that situation. But even if we take that to one side, I can't think of why it would be worthwhile to waste your life believing things that aren't true, shunning people who reject your beliefs, and having this very judgmental, narrow-minded view that everybody who doesn't share your beliefs deserves to be annihilated in the near future. I can't see that as being healthy. I'd much rather have the freedom to think for myself and go where the evidence takes me. And sometimes the evidence takes you in scary directions, believe me. I mean, I've shown some pretty thought-provoking stuff, hopefully, in this video. I think the points that Megan made, I mean, she doesn't say the word predestination, but that for me is what it is. That's some pretty profound stuff. If you're not familiar with those verses, or you've not thought about them much and you are a believer, that's some quite difficult stuff to take in and to process. But if you are a believer watching this, I can only say it's worthwhile just seeing how far the rabbit hole goes. And the beautiful thing is that no one can put you under any pressure to decide on what you believe in. If you want to believe in God, fine. If you don't want to believe in God, fine. just make sure it's you, that you're being true to yourself. Because what's the point in believing something or saying you believe in something just to please others? What a crummy way of living out the rest of your life, living your life just for the people around you. So there's been a few things to go through in this rebuttal. Hopefully I've done it justice. Sorry for the extreme length. I'm actually quite excited and slightly nervous, in fact, because tomorrow I fly to America, to New York, and I'll start meeting people. I'll start meeting some of you over on the other side of the Atlantic. I'm thrilled about it. I'm obviously taking my camera with me. I'm not viewing this as a holiday, I'm viewing it as work. So I am going to do as much activism work as I possibly can. There's going to be promotion of the book. There's going to be filming for the YouTube channel. There's also going to be work on the Truth About the Truth documentary film that I'm working on. So lots of exciting stuff, and I will try to document as much as possible for you, dear viewers. But that's about all I've got to share with you. I hope you found this video interesting, and as always, thank you for watching.